Welcome everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, as Chair of the Global Compact Network India Membership Committee, I am pleased to welcome you to the first virtual knowledge sharing session. As the world is struggling to face up to the global threats of COVID-19 pandemic, the United Nations General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, has rightly declared an all-out war against the pandemic, the novel coronavirus COVID-19. And today's theme for the webinar resonates right in terms of dealing with this pandemic. Learnings from COVID-19 for climate change and other global environmental and health challenges. It is indeed my privilege to welcome our distinguished speakers for the webinar today. We have with us Dr. Mukund Rajan, Chairman of ECube, Investment Advisors Private Limited. We have Dr. Pankaj Gupta, the President of the IIHMR University, Jaipur. And of course, Shankar Venkateswaran, the Chairman of Oxfam India. Across the country, a lot of people are doing something on sustainable development goals, but there is no place where you can connect with each other. So we are creating this platform where everyone can share immense knowledge across the country and align the goals together for a better society. As the idea to expand the horizon and take it to everyone and make everyone part of the sustainable movement, we at the Global Compact Network India stand committed to support all such initiatives to thwart the spread of the virus. SustainEverse, an initiative of the United Nations Global Compact Network India and Social Ladder Foundation, is the first of its kind global sustainability network and technology portal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My apologies. I think there are various technology challenges that we are facing. In my particular case, I am in the south of the country, in an area where broadband connectivity is not ubiquitous, unfortunately. And I lost my video link a few minutes back. I'm on the phone. As soon as the link is restored, I'll come back on the video. But thank you all very much for your time, and greetings to all of you on Earth Day. I hope you're all staying safe as we complete a month now into the nationwide lockdown. It has become a bit of a cliche recently to say that we live in unprecedented times. This is, of course, a bit better than the earlier cliche that we live in interesting times. The fact is, we are in uncharted territory as we speak, and the future looks extremely unpredictable. So what we're going to try and do today is to analyze what we know and try and assess what the future might hold and key elements in that future. In particular, what our experience with COVID-19 has taught us about managing pandemics, the impact they're likely to see on the future of work and the economy, and what lessons might be drawn for the way in which we might manage future global challenges such as climate change. As you just heard, we have two panelists today, Dr. Pankaj Gupta and Shankar Venkateswaran. I'm going to start with Dr. Gupta. It is going to be, I think, a long while before we get fairly accurate assessments of the economic toll that COVID-19 has taken in India. But it is clear that the costs are already enormous. Three statistics might help to make the point. First, the stock markets are down around 25%, which implies around $400 billion of temporary lost value in equities. Second, the fiscal package announced by the finance minister already totals over 0.8% of the GDP, with measures worth around $23 billion announced, including cash transfers, free food and gas distribution, and free health insurance to health workers. And that number is going to mount with additional support. And third, the central fiscal deficit is likely to significantly overshoot the 3.5 percentage points proposed in the budget for 2020-21. There are various estimates that go all the way up to as much as 10% of the GDP over the next year, depending on the measures the government may announce. Parallelly, we are seeing that most of the developed world is going to see a contraction in GDP through the year. So it's going to need huge good fortune for India to avoid the same fate. So to set the context, Dr. Gupta, I would like you to dwell on why COVID-19 caught the entire international community by surprise and how it has single-handedly set back economic growth on a scale that was perhaps last seen only during the Great Depression of 90 years earlier. Dr. Gupta?
Yeah, so what you said is totally right. The world is seeing this very unprecedented crisis, and perhaps after so many years, I think 90 years and more, that when we are facing such a great challenge, the stock prices are down, our GDP is down, and also everybody is thinking that what will happen next. And of course, nobody expected that this kind of unforeseen virus will make the entire world to its standstill. And we are also seeing that how countries like US, Italy, Spain, France, they all are struggling in spite of their having very strong health systems. So it is for sure that it was taken very unaware, but different kind of views are emerging in the market that the virus is also facing different mutation, that different kind of viruses are floating around, and also different kind of theories are also in the market at the moment that it is going to relapse, when the vaccine is going to come, and also there would be another wave for this whole pandemic. So there are many predictions, there are many reports in the market, including the BCG report and many other consulting, they are coming out with their own reports. But still it is anybody's guess at this moment that how the future is going to unfold. So at this moment, I will not be in a position to say anything with exact certainty that what kind of impact it is going to happen. While me and my colleagues at IIHMR University, we have been doing a lot of research discussions every morning. So one of my colleagues has done research and found out that in the 2 months, it has already led to almost 0.9% of the GDP decline. It is already there. And the research is ongoing, and maybe sometime in future, I'll be able to share that how much is the total impact for India and also for the entire world. So what I would suggest, that even for the public health systems and for the public health preparedness, it has opened up a whole new world of challenges and also at the same time a new world of opportunities also in the healthcare sector and being prepared, and for the whole humanity, that under these situations, how we have to handle. And so I'd like to say that the exact economic impact is difficult to assess at this point in time. But there are a lot of work already happening in many governments. And also, that there are a lot of intergovernmental cooperation happening at the moment. So I think the economic growth from some other research, I don't want to quote, but it is likely to take its engine again and sometime in November or in December. But it is definitely a very unprecedented time, and we all have to work together on this. So that is my initial comment, and I'll be sharing more little later. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Gupta, just to hold you on that, understood that there is significant uncertainty. At the same time, we are hearing that there seems to be growing optimism around both a cure and potentially a vaccine. Both could emerge within the next 1 year and perhaps even sooner. And of course, you mentioned there are also concerns about the reoccurrence of the virus. So is it possible for you to give our audience a sense of which elements in our reaction to COVID-19, including this need for a lockdown, including the need for social distancing, the wearing of masks, these kinds of measures, are they likely to persist and for how much longer?
See, like everybody is having a very clear idea that it is this whole pandemic is not going to end very lightly. So it has also created a new system and a new kind of habits, especially in India. You know, now and also thanks to a lot of social media impact and also the TV and other channels, they've been sharing that how you have to wash hand, what kind of, the basic thing you have to take care about the hygiene. And if you look at the economies like Japan, where already there is a culture, people are wearing masks when they go out. There is already like somebody is sneezing, they do it in the sleeve. So it is also like a social and behavioral change communications, and which is happening because the emergency is just right here staring at you. And rather than being prepared and making steps in that direction for the behavioral change, it is because of that situation that everybody has been just aligned. And so I believe that this whole process has to go on. And with the lockdown, and also when the lockdown will be lifted, the social distancing is going to be the norm. I have seen that even in my apartments, in the lift also, they have created different spaces where people can stand. Even if you go to any merchant shop, you will see that people have created these round marks that where people should stand. So I think it is going to make a whole impact even after the first wave of this COVID is over. And people are already getting this feeling that it is not going to go away like that. In the morning also there was a news item that it may convert into a different kind of flu, though still the confirmed sources are not there. So I think it is going to go on. But the kind of behavior change, the kind of impact it has made, and the impact it has made about the hygiene practices, washing of hands, social distancing, the other healthy habits. So it is going to make a big impact. And also you saw that the government of India started initiative through the Arogya Setu and also through on the Ayush ministry, where they have prescribed about asanas, pranayams, and also the immunity boosting substances which are already being used in India for a long time, like turmeric and so on, like the basil. So they will also be quite in use. So government is also focusing more on the prevention side rather than on the cure side. So that is, I would like to say, going forward.
Thank you. Now, on the question of this persisting, if I can just draw some more thoughts from you, Dr. Gupta, on the impact on the economy. And in particular, there are always going to be situations where there will be some losers and some gainers. Which sections do you think of the economy will be most adversely impacted going forward? And which are the other lines of business that could in fact benefit from what we have just been through? There are also in this context perspectives that many have offered that around the world you're going to start seeing a reevaluation by many global businesses of their supply chain dependency because many of the supply chain participants are in markets that are currently quarantined. Do you think there are going to be potential benefits for India and the Indian economy going forward from some of this reevaluation of global supply chains?
Okay. Some days back, we were holding a webinar for the pharmaceutical industry, where our board member, Shri Sudarshan Jainji, who is Secretary General of IPA. So we had many discussions around that. And of course, as we all know that Pharma sector is going to gain a lot. And already we saw that how much was our preparedness when it was about providing the sanitizers or the masks, or even for the basic chemicals. We for the API, we have been quite heavily dependent on China. So we had a long discussion around that how we have to overcome that dependence, how we have to streamline our supply chain. And then this whole lockdown was announced. We have also seen that in certain sectors, although the essential items, there were not much restriction, they were moving freely. But in between, the people went to their homes. The truck drivers were stuck on the way. There were no dhabas for them, and many other kind of problems were there, which led into a lot of discipline in the supply chain. So what is really important that when you think about end to end, we need to look at the complete chain, not only the supply chain, but the entire value chain. We have to look into that. And I think the online industry, the telecom industry, also the pharma industry, the healthcare industry. So these are initially going to gain a lot. And at the same time, there are industries which may not be able to do that well. I'm sure that even on the small scale industry, it is going to impact. So like you shared about the floods in Thailand in 2011. So that created a big impact on the computer industry and the component manufacturers. In the same way, there are a lot of, as we have seen that there are companies who are like Mahindra, for example, they volunteered to manufacture ventilators. There are companies who said, that stopping their normal production line and said, we want to manufacture the sanitizers right now. So I see a lot of, bonhomie and the Indian companies and the Indian industry at this moment, and are joining hands together, to handle this whole pandemic. But initially, and also I was addressing another seminar a few days back where we were talking about what are the very important sectors, even in the education. We realized that public health is also coming up as one of the very attractive options, because you can see there's a lot of meaning here, even much more than money, and you can make a big impact for the whole humanity. So that would be my comments on this question.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you,
just a quick check if you can hear me, if I'm audible, because I've just reconnected through the computer.
Yeah, Rajan, you are audible.
Lovely. Great. Good to be back. The next question I have is linked to one of the perhaps benefits and sometimes downsides that we're seeing of technology. I think just as we are using technology to connect across this country, businesses in responding to the COVID-19 crisis are emphasizing the importance of remote working and communication, embracing digital technologies, infrastructure, and skills. So in a world where digital connectivity will be critical and digital skills will be vital in improving productivity, I'm reminded of the warnings of a previous UN Secretary General that a majority of jobs in many labor-intensive sectors would be at risk, with huge implications for the Indian job market. So I wonder, Dr. Gupta, if you have a reaction to one of these outcomes that we are seeing with COVID-19, the emphasis on digital technology. Is that going to create a different kind of haves and have-nots, or winners and losers in the economy?
I think definitely it is a very important question, and you see that even during this time of lockdown, we have learned how to deliver classes online, how we have to conduct the meetings over Zoom or Skype or Google Meet. Under the normal situations, maybe we would not have thought to explore all that. But we are now seeing that it is becoming so much convenient. Nowadays, we have a common meeting every day at 10:30. Now we see it is much more effective every day. So I believe that this whole challenge has given us a lot of opportunities. We have been using the online mode in a much more powerful way. Even there were certain employees who have been working for last 20, 25 years, and they were not that familiar with the digital technologies. So we have given them training, and now they're also unlocking the whole value which digital world has to offer. Naturally, it would be disadvantage for some people who are unwilling to change. And I agree with the UN Secretary General's statement that some of the job in labor-intensive sectors, and as you know that in India, many of the manufacturing industries are very labor-intensive even now. Though efforts are made to automate and to even bring robotics also at some places. And as such, India has done very well, be it biotech or in IT. So we are already ahead of the curve. So I believe that the remote working, communications, the digital technologies, they are the likely buzzwords. And also the new kind of challenges, we have to be very clear that when you are working from home, how do you measure performance? Because somebody can just say, oh, I am online, and maybe they are busy in doing something else. So the focus will be not on the mechanical spending of time, but it will be on specific and measurable outcomes. And also how to keep your employees motivated when you are not meeting them face to face and you're dealing with them online. So I think even the whole way of HR and even in marketing also, you see that in marketing as well, when you are not getting an opportunity, and even post-lockdown also, it would be difficult to get those kind of business development appointments. So maybe the people who go for business development and marketing, they also have to seek like appointment over Zoom or face-to-face digital meetings. So these kind of things will become more of the new norm. And I believe that as a change is the only constant phase. So people have to adopt to these new ways of doing business.
Sure. Thank you for that. And Shankar, I'm going to encourage you to also reflect on that question, because I have a linked question that I'll come back to a little later. My last question to you, Dr. Gupta, before I turn my attention to Shankar, and this is really about a space that you've been researching for quite some time. It's a area of your expertise. What has the pandemic really taught us about the areas where the Indian public health infrastructure needs to be strengthened? Now, just to put this in context for our viewers and listeners, the government's current spending is of the order of a little under, call it 1.5% of GDP. And at that, it's actually one of the lowest such ratios in the world. How much more should it become in the wake of threats that we are seeing like COVID-19? And where would you emphasize the spending ought to take place in terms of priorities? And just to mention a couple of facts, it's worth bearing in mind that while we've had some very unfortunate fatalities so far from the COVID-19 crisis, till now the number is, as of today and tomorrow, it's probably going to hit 700. But that is the number of Indian children under the age of 5 who die every day from pneumonia and diarrhea. And according to the government, we apparently have one doctor over 1,500 citizens, which is lower than the World Health Organization's recommendation of 1 per 1,000. But the minute you look at rural India, where 2/3 of the population lives, and many rely solely in government hospitals, there the ratio falls quite dramatically to around 1 doctor per 8,000 people. So if you were the health minister of this country, what would you be urging the government to think of in terms of the immediate future and in terms of spending to strengthen healthcare infrastructure in India?
I think it is a very important question and very, very close to our heart. And we, being a premier public health management research organization, so we have been always working with the government, be it the government of Rajasthan or the government of India, and also with the NITI Aayog. We have been giving a lot of suggestion to the government, and in fact, our chairman has been a part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So he has also suggested that the public expenditure in the public health expenditure has to be brought up in a gradual way to around 6% of GDP, because there is a need for building both the quality and also the quantum and also the whole scale of facilities which are to be provided under the public health. Though, as we know that with the adoption of schemes like IIHMR Bharat, some efforts are made and also has impacted a lot of families. And but still there is a very big problem of getting the doctors, as you mentioned, that the ratio is to be 1 per 1,000. But as you mentioned that even in the rural areas, the ratio goes as high as 1 doctor per 8,000 people. So that is really very, very alarming situation. But, we cannot enhance the supply of the doctors in immediate term. So there are use of a lot of digital technologies and also the use of telemedicine, the video medicine, and health ATMs. They are in practice. So these facilities have to be further strengthened. And also when we saw that when the COVID pandemic was here, we also saw that if the situation goes out of our hand, if it goes from stage 2 to stage 3, then how many beds we need, and we saw that our number was very, very less. And also with respect to even when it comes to the testing facilities, even we saw we were highly lacking in that. So, but it is all, and also in the terms of the number of ventilators. So it has shown us the mirror that how much, what kind of, volcano we are just waiting for it to erupt. So it is really a big emergency situation, but it has, I think it has given a very good wake-up call, and I think the government must take it very seriously to enhance the expenditure on the GDP. I know that they have their own different conflicting needs and demands for other public health and other public policy priorities, but and also in terms of the other deaths because of pneumonia, diarrhea, and so on. But India has done very well in terms of containing disease like polio or smallpox. So India has already shown to the world that they, when they resolve it, and they can do really very well. In fact, our university is doing one very important study on the implementation science, that how polio was eradicated from India and what are the lessons to be learned and what are the new developments in the implementation science. And also I believe that there is a need for more institutions in the public health research in terms of the creation of the better facilities, the better public health management. So all these things are needed, and our university is very much committed to that, and many AIMS and other top leading healthcare institutions, they're also setting up public health management institutions. And I do hope future is quite bright and we shall be able to prove it.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Shankar, let me now turn to you. We've seen that the lockdown has sensitized many Indians to a number of issues we perhaps used to take for granted earlier. For instance, the value that migrant labor delivers. both in rural India, especially on farms, and in urban India, where a range of services are provided by them, everything from flying taxis to manning factories. It's also sensitized us to the value of many comforts we've tended to take for granted, including the wide availability of essential and non-essential goods, maintenance of personal hygiene, and civic services around the delivery of clean water and good quality sanitation. So what I'm curious is, from your perspective, do you see some benefits of this kind of sensitization in the way the community is now starting to think about some of these subjects? Are we likely to see changing lifestyles and greater focus within communities on achieving a balance in what we demand, not just from each other as people, but also from the planet? Shankar?
Thanks, Mukund. And let me start with two disclaimers. One, that I am a non-executive chairman of Oxfam, so I don't speak for Oxfam. And the second is that most of my answers will come from the perspective of those who are poor and marginalized, because that is something that I've worked on for many years of my life. So there would be a certain bias, if you like, in the way I respond to some of your questions. So yes, I think there is a great change in the understanding that we are seeing, and I also think that there's also an incredibly greater understanding of how environmentally destructive our lifestyle has been. I think, I can't help but looking at the newspaper every day, and I live in Delhi, which, as you know, has got terrible air quality. And I keep looking at the newspapers, and I see almost no reds when it comes to pollution levels. So clearly, so that's clearly a good thing, and there are many such outcomes. Now, to your question, I think one could take two views on it. I mean, there are two views on it. There is a cynical view on this. So let me start with that, because it's always good to end on an answer on a more positive one. So let me start with the cynical one. One is, I think that this change that we are seeing, this appreciation that you mentioned, I think that will stay for sure for the near several months, maybe a year. I think the defining moment, perhaps, would be when the vaccine is available. So there are people who believe that till such time that the vaccine is available, they're going to be a little bit more careful. They're going to be appreciative of all these things that you mentioned, and so on. And then once the vaccine's there and everybody has the vaccination, then it's business as usual. So that's one view, and evidence to support that view is some of the issues that we mentioned. So, for example, the issue of manual scavenging. I don't think anybody can say that they didn't know it existed, right? But what have we done about it as ordinary human beings sitting here? We see poverty every time we drive out, in our car at every traffic light. So I think that we know that there are migrants. There are migrants that come into our city. They survive in different ways. We don't know exactly how they survive. But yes, the understanding is that we probably didn't realize the numbers in millions that they are till those photographs came out of them trying to escape. So there is that cynical view that, it will happen, but for a while, but then it'll be business as usual later. But I think there is also the positive side, and I don't think one should discount that. There's this theory, and I think Dr. Gupta also mentioned about behavioral change, and there is this whole theory that if you keep doing something repeatedly for 21 days, it becomes a habit, right? So wearing a mask, sneezing into your sleeve, washing hands repeatedly. We've gone through 21 days, we're going through 40 days, so hopefully that will become a habit, and that's a good thing. So I think that will remain. I would like to believe that we would be more empathetic to people who, to a street vendor to people who work at a home, to people who sweep the streets, to people who collect the kura. I would like to believe that we would be more empathetic, because we know, for example, the person who collects the garbage right now. Can you imagine how life would have been for us in a lockdown if garbage wasn't collected? So I think we would get more sensitive to that. So I think there will be some of those positive things. I wonder, and this is a question that I really don't have an answer for. You're absolutely right when you say much of our lives are sort of made comfortable by the invisible hand, not of the markets, to quote Adam Smith, but of the migrant. Now, what happens if these migrants decide we don't want to come back? This is too difficult for us. We were abandoned at the time of our need, which is a fact, and we don't want to come back here. I think then life will change for us. And then I think hopefully life will change, and the way our attitudes and our responses to people who are at the base of the pyramid will change. So I think, I don't think there's one answer to this. I think there are going to be shades of all these things that we're going to see. We're going to see good behavior, and we're going to see business as usual behavior. I suspect that, and I'm still would like to be optimistic and think that we'll have more people whose behavior will change rather than those who don't.
And fingers crossed for that. I'm going to ask you a similar question around, but potentially greater sensitivity at the corporate level on issues such as the need to adopt circular economy practices to minimize the release of waste into the biosphere. And I think it's worth noting that just last week, I think it was one of India's largest IT companies that said on an earnings call that by 2025, they in fact expect only 25% of their workforce to work from facilities that they've created while still maintaining 100% productivity. So do you see corporate India also changing and changing work practices, changing behaviors, and potentially drawing significant lessons from what we've just been through?
I certainly would like to see that. But let's understand the triggers of what causes corporate behavior to change, at least my view on that. To me, there are three principal triggers, I think, that push corporate behavior to change. One is investors and how investors expect them or expect of their investees to behave. The second is, of course, regulators. And the third is customers, the market. And I think it's often a play between all these three forces that actually push companies to behave in a particular way. I'm not at all discounting the fact that many companies do it out of value. You and I have been with the Tata Group. We know what the Tata values are, and we're not unique. There are several Indian companies that have those values. So there's a value driver for sure, but otherwise, externally, these are what the drivers are. And I think it'll be interesting to see how those play out to make these kind of changes possible. I think regulation will definitely change. I think investors who are extremely sensitive to risks and opportunities will definitely understand that, will see the implications that COVID has from a risk perspective, and will certainly push companies to change. But I also think there will be other drivers, and it sort of links to the question that you asked earlier on how will all of us behave. So all of us play multiple roles, right? We are, son, father, husband, wife, daughter, whatever. But we are also employee, we are also customer. And I would think that if we change our own behaviors, as I optimistically said we would, then as an employee, I would be pushing for that kind of behavior for my companies. And I think companies more and more are beginning to recognize that that's as getting to be more important, that if I have to get good talent, retain good talent, I have to be sensitive to what my employees expect of me. So I think that would be an interesting change. And the third parameter I said was customers. So how do customers behave towards companies? There is evidence that customers prefer to buy from companies that have a purpose, that believe in some of the things that you said about being sensitive to the environment, not looking for maximizing profit at any cost. So I think these would be some of the new behavior, new trigger points or new drivers that could change company behavior. So again, I think what COVID has done is to sort of just throw all this up, and we'll have to see how it settles. I would think that if each of us at an individual level change, then our behavior as customers will change, our behavior as employees will change, and that would definitely cause companies to look at issues like circular economy better, look at waste in a very different way. I think for all of us as human beings, as I said earlier, the greatest impact we've seen of this lockdown is on the environment. We breathe cleaner air. I can hear peacocks' voices every evening from Aurobindo Ashram near me, which I never heard before. I've had friends send me a picture of a leopard. Now that's can be seen positively or negatively, but clearly we are in leopard's territory and they're not in our territory. So I think there's a renewal, certainly we can see of nature, and we can say that, yeah, we have been destructive, and let's be more sensitive to that. So yes, there is that hope for sure.
Great, good to hear that. And since you mentioned investors, as one myself, perhaps I could just make the point that currently around the world, over $80 trillion, that's trillion with a T, of funds managed, in fact, now subscribe to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI. That requires fund managers to embed ESG, or environment, social, and governance principles in their investing approaches and in their management of portfolios and disclosure performance. So you can expect that companies that make better disclosures on ESG performance and manage risks, including risks like COVID-19, are more likely to get investments going forward. And I think right after this virus situation settles, you're going to see this trend really accelerate. Shankar, I'd mentioned to you earlier this question on digitization and its implication to a specific question I'm very interested in, which I will now pose to you. And I know Oxfam has done a lot of work on this. You might want to reflect on some of the conclusions of that research. This is really about growing inequality in Indian society and how it influences the way we think about economic growth. It's interesting that just over the weekend, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, made a statement that together we will defeat this virus and rebuild a fairer world. Are we likely to see a fairer society in India? Shankar?
Good question. Let me first, throw you some numbers from Oxfam's report. I think Oxfam, the last couple of years, has been focusing on inequality and has been producing an annual report. In fact, this time's Inequality Report was presented at Davos by Amitabh, our CEO, and it got a very, very positive response all over. The numbers are scary and mind-boggling. So let me just give you a few numbers just to give you the sense of the level of inequality that we're talking about. So globally, the report says that 2,153 people had more wealth than 4.6 billion people on this planet. So 2,000 and 4.6 billion people. That's the kind of inequality we're talking about. The other interesting number is 1% of the world's rich were more wealthy than 6.9 billion people on this planet. And a third one is that the 22 richest men own as much wealth as all women in Africa. So that's the sort of level of inequality. And one of the things that's very interesting about these numbers is that most of these people who are rich, a very large proportion of these 2,153, 1%, are all male. So there is a huge gender inequality that comes. Even if you look at what happens in India, the share of national income that the top 1% of Indians have increased from 10% in 1992 to 22%. So it almost doubled by 2012 in a decade. The bottom 50% of India, of Indians, their share of national wealth decreased from 21% in 1992 to 15%. So what we are seeing is not just globally, but everywhere, inequality is actually increasing. And I think the sensitivity to inequality seems to be something that I wish was far greater than it is. In India, I don't think anybody in India can, I mean, you may be, these numbers might be astounding, but nobody in India can say, I didn't know that we are such an unequal society. We are unequal on the basis of caste, on the basis of gender, on the basis of religion, and so on and so forth. Even if you look at inequality from a very different lens, not just from a wealth lens, just in terms of how the poor subsidize the rich. Let's take something like per capita GHG emissions. Now, India's average GHG emission is about 1.9% tons per annum. Compare it with Europe, which is about 8, US, which is about 16 to 18 tons. So we are 1/8, 1/4, 1/8 of these. But you and I, Mukund, have the same lifestyle and have the same emission as somebody in Europe. I think we drive the same cars, we have the same equipment at home. So our GHG emissions would be comparable to someone in Europe. But India's average is 2, and yours and mine average, let's say, for the argument's sake, is 8. So why is the average so low? That's because we have so many people who don't have access to any form of energy. And therefore, they are actually subsidizing. So when we go into a global climate change conference and we say we have such low per capita GHG emissions, is because the poor are subsidizing us and allowing us to place that argument. So the inequality that we are dealing with is very high. And what we saw in COVID on what happened to migrant workers, what happened to informal sector workers, is just an example. There is also another interesting number that Oxfam did on unpaid work. This is a big problem because you have work that is unpaid, done almost entirely by women and girl children, which is just cooking, cleaning, all that, all the basic stuff that we take for granted. And I think their estimate was that across the world, if they put a value to that, it is $10.8 trillion for that. So I think the inequality situation is huge. I think in India, we have structural problems of inequality. We have it because of our attitudes towards gender, towards caste, towards religion. I don't think COVID is going to necessarily shake that. In fact, if you're sitting face to face, I would give you many examples of how, in fact, this has been exacerbated in this COVID situation, how those inequalities actually have been exacerbated. For example, although if you look at what governments have done, and we can talk about that later, when the lockdown happened, I think it came as a surprise to not just us, but even to the government, that there was such a large number of migrant people because they're invisible. They don't exist. So I would certainly like to see a fairer world. I think everybody in this panel and on this meeting would like to see that. But is it going to happen by itself? Is it going to happen on account of COVID? I seriously doubt it. It has to be. It is a man-made situation, and only a man-made situation can reverse it. I don't think a COVID can reverse this kind of thing.
Lots of food for thought there, Shankar. Thanks very much for that. With the permission of the organizers, I'm going to continue the session for another 10 minutes, if that is okay, because we started late. And I'm going to really wrap up with 2 questions relating to the role of government and on climate change. Then I'm going to be scanning while the speakers are speaking some of the Q&A questions that participants have posed and just make sure whether we've covered most of their queries. Of course, I'd encourage everyone on this webinar to offline also seek to reach out either to the Global Compact or to the individual participants on this panel. So my next question, Shankar, this is specific to the challenge of climate change. I think what COVID-19 has really demonstrated is that governments, when they choose to, can certainly act with great authority and determination. There's already been commitments of hundreds of billions of dollars, which is going to stretch to trillions of dollars on everything from procurement of personal protective equipment to ventilators, chemicals and drugs, including what India is supplying, hydroxychloroquine, incentivizing vaccine development, commandeering hospitals, providing food for the poor, paying salaries for workers forced to stay at home, and so on. It looks as if communities around the world, and certainly in India, have been prepared to accept the ensuing trade-offs for their own survival. So they're willing to accept a loss of income, at least for a short period of time during a lockdown, while awaiting a solution to the crisis. So, question to you, Shankar, what does this suggest about the way in which the international community could come together to address another large looming crisis like global warming and climate change? And who do you see precisely taking the lead on something like this? Shankar?
You're right about the way government has acted decisively. I would tend to agree with that. I mean, you could argue whether they did it on time. I'm not talking just about the Indian government. I'm talking about all governments. There's criticism what the way UK and the US handled it and handled it late. In fact, even Italy ignored it for a while. But when they did, yes, they were certainly decisive. No question of that. I think, on the point again of people willing to accept a bit of uncertainty on this, I think people, it depends on your ability to deal with uncertainty. I don't think a daily wage worker necessarily understands this because his ability to eat the next meal depends on his ability to work and earn something. So it depends on whose perspective you're looking at. But I think what is very clear is that pandemics like this suggest that there has to be a lot more working in concert for us to address them. What happens with pandemics as opposed to climate change, and I think the trick for us who worry about climate change on a day-to-day basis is we need to make it. We need to communicate to everyone, including governments, that it is as urgent a crisis as COVID. I think that's the communication gap that we see. It's like how we respond to a cyclone as opposed to how we respond to a drought. If you look at even how governments respond to them, cyclone, you have warnings, you can see it coming, you respond immediately, you can take steps. Drought, actually, because it creeps in on you, governments don't necessarily act decisively on time, and arguably many governments do it late. Climate change is similar. So climate change is similar to a drought, just like COVID is similar to a cyclone or an earthquake. But I think the impacts are the same. And it's about how that gets recognized, that the impacts that it will have are the same, even though it might happen over a longer period of time. So what does it require? And I think for the world to act in concert, it requires, I think, two things to happen when it's long term. One is that you need to have a longer term agreement on a way forward, both at the national level and at a global level, which means that at a national level, you need to actually also build a political consensus around. Because if you take India, you're talking about what's going to happen between 2020 and 2050. We're going to have 10 elections, 10 general elections, and I don't know how many hundreds of state elections in that period of time. Governments are going to keep continuously changing. Now, you can't have a policy or an approach to climate change changing with every election, right? So you need to build a national consensus, and everybody needs to agree, independent of the political party which is in power, this is the way India is going to go forward. Similarly, you need to have that international consensus, which means you need an UNFCCC. You can't have a sort of a climate change agreement without a UNFCCC. And what is going to be interesting is to see how the UN system survives this, because the WHO has not been it's been the whipping boy of many people. So if you look at WHO, if you look at WTO in a different context, these are global institutions that are meant to provide that multilateral framework for us to work on. And I think it'll be interesting to see how these survive, how WHO survives post-COVID, and if it survives, and if its strength gets strengthened, then the UNFCCC kind of institutions get strengthened. Then you will have people getting together. But I think, the question on the vaccine is a really interesting one, and I think Dr. Gupta is probably best placed to respond to it. My own understanding is that I don't think the global community has got together and said, let's put all our resources together and find a vaccine. I think it's all individual initiatives that seem to be going around. It's not a global consensus that people as a globe find a cure, find a vaccine for it. And I think that's the kind of thing that would give the signal to say, yeah, the globe is getting together, we realize we are all in it together, and we need to act on it. That's similarly how we need to do on climate change. So I think that's the way I would see this. So I would still remain optimistic, but I do recognize that, I do believe that the two things that are required is a national consensus across, which is independent of parties, political parties, and second is you need a global institution that can then take everybody along and do it. I'll stop there.
I'm just curious whether Dr. Gupta had a reaction also to that question, including your question about how is the international community trying to coordinate efforts to find a medical solution, both the vaccine and the cure. Dr. Gupta?
See, the vaccine development is taking place in all the countries, and also the testing has started in other countries. But to the best of my knowledge, as of today, there are no confirmed result on that. That is my, response.
Yeah. Is there also an effort to coordinate the international innovation, science, technology that's being deployed? Are there institutions that are trying to pull all this together so that you have international collaboration?
Yeah, in India it is anyway happening under auspices of the government of India. But international level, I may not be able to tell confidently about it at this moment.
Right. Okay. I'm going to get into my last question and then a quick check of the Q&A questions we received. And apologies once again to all participants for the slight delay in this program. But thank you all for staying on. I know some of you have had to leave because you had a hard stop at 6, and that's absolutely understandable. My last question, first to you, Shankar, and then to Dr. Gupta. One of the possible negative outcomes of the way in which governments are having to react to the COVID crisis is this whole business of government monitoring of citizens, what they are doing, where they are going, whom they are meeting, tracing all their contacts and so on. And of course, various apps have been developed that locate carriers of the virus, monitor their movements and interactions with other citizens. China, of course, has done this very successfully and also recovered very swiftly from the virus, potentially because of, amongst other things, its deployment of an array of surveillance technologies. Is this something that worries you, Shankar, about potential future use, maybe for other purposes? And then I'll come to Dr. Gupta on the same question. Shankar?
Well, the cynic in me is worried, Mukund, because I think that governments in general, once they get onto a good thing, they don't like to take it back. And I'll give you two examples just in India. there is to all non-profits, there's a dreaded thing called the Foreign Contributions Regulations Act. Now, this FCRA was enacted during emergency. So you can understand the conditions under which it was enacted. And it's alive and well. And if anything, if you ask most NGOs, it's getting more and more problematic over time. So far from withdrawing it, it's just getting more and more stringent. Similarly with Aadhaar, till the Supreme Court said you don't need it for all these things, there was a creep in terms of how much more Aadhaar you needed for a bank account, for a mobile, and so on and so forth. So given the evidence, I would worry about it. I would love to be proved wrong because I can understand the need for it in these conditions. Very clearly, it makes sense to do it. We need to track people. We need to be able to do that. But I don't have reason to believe that it will very easily be withdrawn. So if that remains my worry. That's all.
Dr. Gupta?
And mind you, again, I just want to sort of clarify that this is not any one government or another. We've had multiple governments on FCRA from 1976 when it was enacted to now. Different governments of different hues and colors and coalitions and everything else. But still, FCRA has remained on the statute books and is not going anywhere. So governments in general, I would say, have the tendency to want to keep.
Understood. Dr. Gupta, you have any perspective you'd like to share?
Yeah, Dr. Rajan, I would like to say that it all depends on the credibility of the government, saying, and how that, government is perceived by the others, what by the majority, what by the some minorities and so on. So everybody look from their own angle. I would definitely support it because the situation demands so. And therefore, I believe that it is a good step on the part of the government. And at the same time, once this pandemic is controlled and the reverse migration and other things are also seen, and that flow is not there, and then people have the liberty to uninstall the app. Like here in Jaipur, the government has said that you can now go to the university, you can open the administration office, must install the Arogya Setu app. So we have done that. And so the freedom to act is in your hand, that you can always uninstall the app. And you can also have necessary precautions on your phone. But I'd like to say that in my campus, I saw the peacocks back after many years. It was such a delight. Earlier, we had a big, peacock garden. My earlier alumnus used to talk about, sir, we have peacock garden. So many peacocks there. And so many things. And also, we are going to talk about social distancing, but the emotional connect. More and more connect with the social media and other things. And also, we see different kind of things like some couples getting cozier, some are getting violence. It all depends on what perspective you take. Many people wanted to have some good time with themselves and seeing, in what direction are they going. So getting a see, that where we are and going with a restful mind rather than being restless all the time. So I believe this also has given an opportunity to connect with self. And I believe the healthcare workers, this is very, very important. And also the bhav of the seva. They are working under extreme pressure, under very hostile situations. So they need a lot of praise and appreciation and understanding from our side. So I think we have to move from I to we, that illness to wellness. So that is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Well,
Mukund, just one thing, if I may, and I think I saw a couple of messages in the chat saying that, but I have to say that I find the social distancing a very unfortunate term. In fact, Amitabh, who's the CEO of Oxfam India, first used it. He said it's called physical distancing and social fraternity. So you actually need to be socially together while being physically distant. So I think social distancing is not a very good term in these conditions.
Quite right, quite right. And as you rightly said, several people in the chat have just mentioned the same point. We should call it physical distancing and not social distancing. I'm just going to read out one question from the Q&A. Maybe Shankar, you can try and address that. The question is from Rashmika Das. How do we address and deal with the stress and anxiety amongst families who are most impacted due to the lockdown? The vulnerable section of society, women, children, may be target of violence and abuse, and the impact may be permanent. They may not have access to reach out to help. What steps can or should be taken by the government and non-profits to help them rebuild their lives? Shankar?
I think it's a serious problem. I think Dr. Gupta also mentioned it. And it's particularly been a problem. I know of many NGOs that I'm familiar with who are trying to deal with this issue. I'm fortunate, very privileged to live in a place where I have enough space to move around. I have more than one room to be physically distant if I needed to. But there are not many people who are fortunate like that. And this sort of brings it, that constant physical contact with each other sometimes can have that impact. And Dr. Gupta also made mention of that. So I think it's a real problem. And one of the things that there are several NGOs that are trying to work on this issue. It's very tough because of the lockdown, because you can't physically access them. If the woman doesn't have access to a phone to call a helpline, how do you do it? But there are many NGOs that I know of who have helplines where you can call them. They also are providing counseling services on the phone, not just to individuals, but also to couples where there are these kinds of tensions happening. I think given I think that the whole issue around mental health in India is the most underrated part of health that we have. I think it's extremely underrated in terms of how we recognize it, how we deal with, and we normally deal with it with a lot of stigma. And in these conditions, it just makes it worse. So I think it's about destigmatizing. It's about just trying to do what you can under these circumstances. Very difficult to do without actually being face to face. That's what a lot of counselors tell me. But that's what NGOs are doing, and they must continue to do that. And I think every NGO that is working, that is not even necessarily equipped to do counseling, because it is a specialized activity. Even if they're just doing food distribution, one of the things they should perhaps find out is there any issues like this, and then let people who know how to deal with this better, let them know that there is this issue there. If you can, please try and address it.
Right. So as Dr. Gupta said, there may be a beneficial impact for some of us in terms of more mindfulness in the time that we have with ourselves. But at the same time, there could also be a silent crisis that is brewing in many households where there is this kind of challenge also. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to try and figure out what we can do to identify the issues and try and support those who need help. I'm very conscious that we are beyond even the 15 minutes. Yeah. Dr. Gupta, maybe some closing comments from you, and then
you better close.
Williams.
I just want to say one thing that one thing people must understand. Whatever is happening is happening. You don't have any control over that. So what is not in your hand. Why to break your head over there? And you see, that what is in my hand. When I'm there at home, whether I can create the hell out of heaven or heaven out of hell, it all depends on me. And so if you really go for some relaxation, do some yoga nidra, meditation, mindfulness, create a very good positive environment in the place. And there are many times when you start saying something and person says, yeah, I know what you're trying to say. So the basic listening itself is not there. Because people are carrying so much of, the previous burden in their head and they are unwilling to say. It is the time, to forgive somebody, forget something, past is past. And as Buddha used to say, that, when you are given the eyes, then see. You are given the ears and hear. But what we do, we are seeing from the eyes, not. We are seeing from the mind what was there in the past. So where is the possibility of a beginner's mind? And we are carrying many undue burdens. And when you are having a place where you can't go out of home, then these things aggravate. And some people are really in a lot of pain. And what Shankar was sharing, that there are certain helplines. So there are there. But firstly, you need to ignite all the power which is already within you. You do not need any external help. Let me tell you, based on my experience in many countries, in many different kind of avatars. If people can be a little bit of guided towards some inner journey, be it a meditation, yoga, pranayama, mindfulness, whatever people are comfortable with, there is an immense peace and inner bliss which you can harness anytime. So that is what I just thought to share. Thank you.
I think very well put, and I think it's an apt note on which we can conclude our discussion. I'm conscious that we are well over time. I'm very grateful to all our participants who stayed on the webinar much beyond the schedule. May I now thank both participants and hand over to Brigadier Williams for the final concluding remarks. Brigadier.
Thanks.
Dr. Mukund, I think the session was really brilliant in the way that you actually managed the time also. It's more than an hour since the time we really started. We started late. And both our panelists, I think, have done commendably in sharing from the heart what we all talked about, the major learnings on dealing with the pandemic in India. We touched upon various issues regarding the health infrastructure and various measures that were adopted because of the draconian measures that were required to stem the spread of the disease and the likely changes of aftermath of COVID-19. So the main focus areas, I think you all have really covered it very well. And all this has really led on to the major thing of the global environmental issues and climate change, which needs to be addressed, which is a focus, of course, of the United Nations Global Compact Network, and especially with India, which is doing a lot of work. Well, with that, I think we will conclude the session, and to thank you, Mukund, and thank you, Dr. Pankaj, and of course, Shankar, for a wonderful session that we actually had with so many participants. And once again, to conclude, I would like to thank all our participants from all across the world who have joined in today. Thank you very much. Let us stay safe and build a better future together. Thank you. And good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brigadier. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thanks, Mukund. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you guys.
Bye.